Welcome to another week of Dr. Stone Weekly, the show where people are in the stone world, or science people are in the stone world, or stone people are in the science world. Nobody really knows. We left off episode 3 with our gang traveling to Hakone to try to make gunpowder to fight Tsukasa. That's the only way they can think of. And they have heavily used the term weapons of science. This is something that they've come to use now. And Senco in the last episode makes a point of saying that gunpowder was only invented 2,000 years ago, so in a matter of a few minutes, they're going to teleport from the Stone Age to the modern era, traveling 1.9 million years by his estimation. So that's the kind of setup that we had leading into this episode. So how did this episode go? Well, this episode was actually a refreshing change of pace from what we've had so far, because 3 episodes in, pretty much every week has been somewhat fast-paced with some action, even if it had to be introduced in the form of animals chasing them through the woods. But so far we've had discoveries made in every single episode, we've had progress made in every single episode, and this might be the first episode where we don't really see that kind of progress that we usually see, and I think that's actually probably a good thing. So what happened in this episode of Dr. Stone? In this episode of Dr. Stone, we start off in Hakone and we immediately get a demonstration of how powerful gunpowder actually is. Now, for someone like us who live in the modern era, gunpowder is not something that we can easily relate to. Maybe if you shoot guns a lot or shoot vintage guns a lot, gunpowder is something that you could probably understand the power of. But if you're just a normal person living in 2000 whatever, gunpowder doesn't really make sense. You know that people used to use it, but we don't really know how powerful it is. So immediately we get a demonstration of Taiju just hitting this whole bag of gunpowder with rocks. And stone hitting stone is not supposed to cause a spark and create an explosion or anything like that. But out of nowhere, Senku immediately realizes that in this area there's a lot of iron pyrite in the rocks. So if you do smash them against each other, they could make sparks because there's metal inside the rocks. And you know, guess what? That's exactly what happens. So we have Senku figuring out that there's going to be a spark, but Taiju obviously can't react in time, and there's a spark and there's this huge explosion. And typical Japanese family safe values, we immediately get a message from a robotic animated Senku telling us, this is the real recipe for gunpowder. We're not just making this up. Please don't try this at home. We could get sued if you make a bomb or anything like that. So that put aside, that was just, that was straight out of the anarchist cookbook right there, telling us the recipe for gunpowder in episode 4 of a show. But we do understand the power of gunpowder right there. And we understand that this is deadly even to Tsukasa. They do make a point of pointing that out pretty clearly, is that with this gunpowder, even he's scared of what could be done to him with it, because it's, pretty advanced science for the amount of technology that they have. They really only have stone tools. Stone tools and crossbows really aren't a threat to him because he's some kind of Superman, but when you have gunpowder, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So he comes running to try and stop them, but not before they spot something significant. They spot a smoke signal. So their explosion of gunpowder created this giant cloud of smoke hanging above their heads, which also reveals their location to Tsukasa. And just so happens that someone, seeing their smoke signal, made their own smoke signal to try and tell them that, oh, we're here too. First of all, I thought this was just a great way to show how people used to communicate before there was electronics. Just the existence of somebody outside of those 3 of them is a pretty big deal. We have been seeing people in the OP for a few episodes, so it's not like we didn't know this was going to happen. But when it actually does happen, we haven't met the characters yet, but when it actually does happen, it does have a different impact. And when you see a smoke signal like that in their position, standing on a volcano when they're alone fighting this like Superman guy who wants to kill every adult in the world and establish a new world order, sometimes it's nice to have a little backup. So when they see the smoke signal, their immediate conflict is, do we make more smoke, tell them that yes, we are here and this wasn't just some random volcanic eruption, or, and by doing so, risk having Tsukasa come basically straight to us, or do we just ignore it? And obviously, seeking companionship and maybe wanting to tell the other humans that they are in fact there, they go for the first option and say, hey, let's just make another smoke signal. We can send them a clue of our location. And even if Tsukasa does immediately come to us, that's something that we can deal with. And guess what? Tsukasa comes immediately at them, maybe like 25 seconds later. Say what you will of the guy, he's pretty smart. And we're shown this, that he's pretty smart, because he thinks back to when Taiju was collecting those seashells from the beach to make or all the mortar and stuff that they were making with calcium carbonate. And it turns out that the fourth use that Senku never told him was to make weapons of science. Apparently, calcium carbonate is important in making potassium nitrate, which is one of the ingredients of gunpowder, and Senku didn't reveal that to him at the time, but we find out now when Senku already has a bag of potassium nitrate ready to go when they arrive in Hakone so they can make this gunpowder. Shout out to Tsukasa for being a smart guy. It's pretty cool that he is a smart guy and not just like a dumb brute, kind of like how Taiju is. Even though Taiju's not aggressive in any way, he's just strong and dumb. Tsukasa seems to be strong, smart, and, capable of, or willing to fight at least, where Taiju's not willing to fight at all. He just wants to get hit. He's kind of like a tank player. He just keeps taking the damage without dishing out any damage, which makes him less useful than Tsukasa in a way. And this episode ultimately had one of the more interesting cutaways. The reason I said it was a change of pace is because we cut to this weird 2-minute long segment where they show Senku's like scientific journey that he took as a kid, because the ultimate crux of this episode revolves around Tsukasa asking Senku to abandon science or face death. Tsukasa ultimately, after he shows up, he takes Yuzuriha hostage. He says, hey, I'm going to kill this girl if you don't tell me the ingredients for the magical fluid that revives people from their stone state. And then Senku obviously has to tell him because he's a nice guy and he doesn't want to see people getting killed for no reason. Although he does try to make a little play at it by saying that, hey, I don't really care about her. Go ahead and kill her. Let's see what happens. And he just cuts her hair off, and Senku, basically gives in and tells him the ingredients. So after he tells him the ingredients, Tsukasa gives him an option. He tells him, you can either abandon science, or I'm going to have to kill you because I can't have you bringing back the scientific world in the way that it was before. I'm trying to make a better world out here, and you're just trying to make everything back to the way it was. So that's the ultimate conflict of this episode. And Senku, to give us a little bit more context about Senku's character, because this is maybe the one thing that I've complained about most about this show, is that we're not attached to Senku enough, and that every time, we have something happen to him or he makes some discovery, we're glad that he did that because we're in a better place now, but we're not really given any context as to why science is important to him, or maybe anything about his journey that would allow us to connect to him more as a character. And I think this episode was the first step of us being allowed to connect more to Senku as a character, and we're shown that because Senku, Taiju, Yuzuriha, when they were in middle school, Senku wants to go to space. That's like his whole thing. He wants to be an astronaut. So when they're in middle school, Senku builds a rocket and he wants to go to space, and that's his whole thing. And we're shown this long montage about how his dad sold his car to buy him science tools, and the progress that Senku made as a scientist through elementary school and through middle school, ultimately culminating in him making a rocket powerful enough to launch 3 kind of little dolls into space. That just shows us how important science is to him. And that's, of course, very important because the episode revolves around him, refusing to, deny science from himself. And at the very end of the episode, it ends on a cliffhanger as always. Last week, the cliffhanger was, oh, hey, we got gunpowder now. What's Tsukasa going to do? And this week, it was, oh, hey, abandon science or die. And Senku obviously doesn't abandon science. So we end on this, cut to black, kind of gut-wrenching noise of someone probably getting dismantled. It sounded like they went to town on a watermelon in that sound lab. They probably had a heck of a day doing that. So what do I think about the episode? At the end of the day, I do think it's very nice that Tsukasa is reluctant to kill Senku in the first place, and that he's willing to make this deal at all, because I feel like in someone else's hands we could have ended up with just a super evil character who just does whatever needs to be done without considering consequences, without having any emotions of any kind. And I feel like Tsukasa is a more interesting character because he doesn't do that, and he is a human, and he has emotions, and ultimately what he's trying to do is something that he thinks will make the world a better place. And we can't really argue against that. Even if we don't agree with his methods, we can't be like, oh, he's operating from a place of self-interest or something that is not for the betterment of humanity, because he thinks he's doing something that'll make humanity better at the end of the day. The comparison I always use is the Professor X versus Magneto dynamic, and I feel like that didn't come through better in any episode before this than this episode. This episode, I feel like we really got that dynamic of one person who values something so much, and that one thing is what's stopping them from being good friends with the other person, as Tsukasa says in this episode. If they had met 3,700 years before in an already established world order, he might have been, Senku might have been Tsukasa's first friend, and that's obviously a very powerful emotion coming from someone who's about to kill you. If they feel like they have to say that, or they want to say that now before they can't say it to you anymore, you really know that that's a powerful emotion for them. The show probably is as strong as ever, and I didn't think we'd reach this impasse so quickly. I thought it would take a lot more chasing before Tsukasa ultimately caught up to them, but of course, by speeding through these like early tropes that we expect to see, we can kind of get to more of maybe the more interesting stuff later down the line, and that's ultimately what I'm looking forward to. As always, haven't read the manga, although I've been tempted to. Yesterday I saw the manga come up on my manga reader app, and I'm like, hey, should I check this out? I was like, no, I'll wait for the anime. The anime is pretty good. The backgrounds have grown on me, like the world looks super wild as ever, and we finally get a look at our first non-human character. I'm finally immersed in the setting. I like it all the way now. The conflict between Senku and Tsukasa is pretty good. Maybe some of the animation cuts are a little bit more janky than I'd like. That'd probably be my only complaint. But hey, in an episode with very little action, you can't really complain about that. Clearly, they're saving their budget for something. Let's see what it ends up being. I'm going to guess it's going to be some fight between Senku and his allies and Tsukasa and his allies somewhere down the line. That's just a vague guess. So that's it for episode 4 of Dr. Stone. The series is going as strong as ever. We're seeing that ideological clash that we all like to see. That's not just about pumping fists and punching each other in the face. That's that good Dr. Stone content that we all come here for. So that's it for this week. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next episode.